I'm Glenn Adamson, the guest curator for Merryll Saylan, This Is Your Life. It was a real pleasure for me to curate this exhibition, partly because I've known Merryll for such a long time. The minute I met Merryll, even though I was just starting out in the field, I could tell that she was something really different and really special. Whereas most woodturners active then were very interested in the color and figure and texture of the natural wood. You could say they had a connoisseurship of timber. What Merryll does is much more oriented to ideas about design and painting. She was in fact trained in a design context and really applies the ideas of modern shape and proportion and color to her work. And that idea of color has become increasingly important over time. It's wonderful to look around at all of the objects and see the huge variety that she has been able to achieve using this very broad palette of pigments. It's also interesting to think about Merryll as a still life artist. Although she makes objects that look like they could be functional, like teacups or plates or trays, in fact, all of her objects, if you think about it, are just a little bit off, a little bit exaggerated. The teacup might be a little too big for the saucer that it sits on, an odd scale to drink out of. A plate might be too fragile to put food on, so that you're inclined more to hang it on the wall than put it in your dining table. All of these objects have been heightened in some way, taken out of the everyday context of domesticity, where you might expect to see a utilitarian form, and instead made aesthetic first and foremost. And yet she's also still very dedicated to the idea of domesticity as content for her work. And that was one reason why we decided to call the show This Is Your Life. It could be understood as a reference to Merryll Saylan's own career, her meandering path, as she likes to say, as a professional wood artist. But it could also be understood as a message to the audience. These are the kinds of objects that fill our days and our experience. And it's really wonderful to see how Merryll has taken them and heightened them into a sense of contact and encounter with the richness that surrounds us every day.
My name is Merryll Saylan. I went to design school at UCLA. I had 3 kids the whole time I went, and I decided that I needed a break. My break included Chinese cooking class, a French cooking class, and I enrolled at Cal State Northridge in a woodworking class. And in the woodworking class, we had to take up turning. The idea was that if you learn how to use all the machinery in the shop, you develop your vocabulary to be a designer. And somehow I never left. I entered the graduate program, and that's what happened to me. The other thing was, in the woodworking program, I built some furniture. I realized I do not love joinery, too precise for me. And I just stuck to the lathe, and probably one of the few students who did that. I moved before I got my master's to Santa Cruz and commuted back and forth to Cal State Northridge. At some point, I hated Santa Cruz. It was just too boring for me. I'm an urban person. My husband didn't want to move back to LA, and so we compromised and moved to San Francisco. Once I hit San Francisco, that was home. I just loved it up north.
Merryll, so many of your objects relate to food, plates, kitchen. Is that just your love of cooking, that you could have been a great chef as well?
I do love to cook. I thought, well, I've been dieting since I'm like 6 years old. And that part of it is just this constant concern about food and exercise. I love family events. I love inviting people over for dinner. One of my husband's best friends was the Japanese liaison for the mayor of LA, and he used to own a Japanese restaurant. And he took me shopping and taught me how to do a lot of cooking. The first thing I ever turned was the set of rice bowls. And my son remembers us trying them out at the dinner table with rice. We ate out of them. So I guess that interest never disappeared.
Do you see your work as something that people can use, or is it really just art to be looked at?
When I started, it was functional. Coming from design school, the whole concept was function plus beauty. And I always felt that that was harder than art in many ways. To make something really work and really look good was more difficult than a piece of art. But as it evolved, it just changed and it became not functional. And then it was more that I wanted people to see these forms for how beautiful they are.
How come you didn't go in for the ultra exotic woods?
I think two reasons. I went back to school late. I didn't get my master's till I was 40. Some of the students, they were younger, and I felt like the students had parents who were paying to go to school, and I couldn't afford those exotic woods, and so I bought less expensive woods. And then there was a sculptor I knew in L.A. whose work I admired greatly. And he used to talk about buying plain wood so that the grain didn't interfere in his form and what he was trying to say. And that always stuck with me. And I felt like the form was more important. It's a combination of both things. But I felt like a lot of the wood turners, even some of the woodworkers early on, only cared about the wood and not how ugly their designs were. I started making a lot of platters. They were flat on a table. I started making plates. I also had a horrible arthritic back. Bending over lathe for small little bowls was not something physically that I could do, but flat plates was something that I could stand straight and do. And then I started carving actually as an accident. One piece that I was going to color had a scratch in it, that North Seas piece. I just didn't know what to do with it because it had already been off the lathe, it had already been dyed. And then a friend of mine who was a furniture maker said, you must be able to do something to the inside of that piece. I don't know what propelled me, but I used my Dremel, just carved the whole surface that hid my scratch. And I thought, oh, this is kind of nice. Then when I was doing all these pieces flat, as part of a way to sell them, I thought, wouldn't they be nice if you could really see them? And I started hanging them on the wall and make it look like painting more than just a useful platter. But I have friends who bought my carved platters and serve cheese and crackers on it all the time. So it does function that way. And then it's just like a step-by-step process. Then I put a square in the middle of a round piece. Then the square needed to house something. Then it's the food. I love food. I've done just small sculptures of figs and pomegranates, and they're fun to paint and shape.
The title of the show is This Is Your Life. What is it like to look back on a very long career? Has it been worthwhile?
I think being an artist, being a craftsperson is really one of the luckiest lives. I mean, if you can afford it. My husband and I were very lucky by selling some houses and stuff, but I have friends all over the world, and there's a relationship that happens. I did a residency in England for almost a year and a half doing crafts, and from that, a German woman came and worked 2 months in my studio there. And then we went to Germany, and then she invited me to be in a show in Germany. And this connection to the world at large, because we have this similarity. My husband and I traveled through Scandinavia one time, and we were in Sweden and stopped in to see this furniture show. And as we're looking at the furniture, this guy says to my husband and me, "Can you make a living doing this?" And we started laughing because it was universal. Our impetus to do the work and our struggles to sell the work, it didn't matter where you were. There's some connection in people who do that kind of thing. And to me, that's a wonderful life.
I want to thank Merryll Saylan, her family, the center's staff, and Glenn Adamson for helping me make this movie.